What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio, world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor.
Thank you, Tony, and hi, everybody. Our first esteemed guest is here to explain the benefits as well as the challenges of using cannabis in spiritual practice.
Author Stephen Gray is sharing his book, Cannabis and Spirituality, An Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. It shows us the use of marijuana in a wide range of disciplines, including meditation, yoga, chanting,
along with visualization, shamanism, group ceremonies, and as a creative aid. Stephen also explains that cannabis truly is a medicine for the body and the soul, and one of its greatest gifts is its remarkable potential for spiritual healing as well as awakening. Well, Tony, it looks like there's a heck of a lot more about the people's plant than just getting high. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome author Stephen Gray.
Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Hello?
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, it broke up for a sec, but it's okay now.
Oh, it's all the applause. That's why. Well, we really appreciate you doing the show with us, and I know we had you scheduled at the beginning of July, and the electricity and internet, everything went out, so it must have been one of those meant to be's, and this is going to be a great show, and I hope a lot of people learn from this show. Eddie's back, and we're excited to have him back, and the people that are joining us on UBN Radio, if you have any questions, please leave it in the chat room. People on the Facebook Live, please leave it in the comments, and we'd love to have you ask Stephen questions if you'd like. That said, Stephen, I know there's a lot of talk these days. Controversy about marijuana, and most people that I know that don't do it, they have that stereotype of what pot and marijuana is. And so I want to know, before we get into the conversation, is how you got interested in the cannabis portion of, because you don't hear cannabis too much other than when it comes to products, but how did you get more involved into the cannabis industry or genre?
Sure. I wouldn't say I'm involved in the cannabis industry, though.
Okay.
Well, let's see. What's the simplest way to put that? I'm from the baby boom generation, and cannabis, became popular for a lot of people back then. And I liked it right off the bat. I can't say that I always used it wisely and well in those days. And in fact, in around about age 2021, I'm almost convinced that it triggered a bout of sort of not too severe bipolar condition in me. So we can talk about that as we go along.
Sure.
Because not that specific situation, but the implication of that, which is that a lot or much depends on how you use this plant and where you're at with it. There's this phrase that you're probably familiar with: set and setting.
Right.
Really important for cannabis as well, for cannabis as an ally, or for really to get the most benefit out of it psychologically and spiritually. I liked it back then, and then I went through a period where I didn't use it at all. I was involved with Tibetan Buddhism, and the people I was around weren't keen on cannabis at all. They didn't see it as a spiritual ally at all. And I guess without making it too twisty and long a story, what eventually led it back to me was I'd always been interested in the psychedelics as well, also coming out of that time. And I'd had a couple of experiences that you might call spiritual. And again, when I got involved with Tibetan Buddhism, they weren't too keen on those either. Meaning things like LSD, psilocybin, peyote, etc.
Right.
But then in 1988 or so, I got wind of Terence McKenna. And Terence McKenna reconnected the two themes of psychedelics and spirituality, or religious use, or whatever you want to call it, and pointed out that hey, folks, these substances have been used on this planet for thousands of years in ceremonial, shamanic, healing, ritual contexts. And a light went off in my brain at that point, and pointed me back toward the combination of meditation, spiritual practice kind of stuff, and the sort of wise use of psychedelics. Cannabis was only a minor part of my experience in those days, and I still hadn't recognized or thought much about it as a spiritual ally. And that came along much later. I guess maybe 10 years or so ago. I don't remember. It started to occur to me that as cannabis was getting more attention and starting to get feet into the legal regime and so on like that, that the one area that people hadn't really addressed or weren't addressing or even thinking about much was its use as a spiritual ally. So I got interested in that, and about 4 years ago, I was having a conversation with Kathleen Harrison. I co-organized this conference in Vancouver called the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And one of our presenters that at that time was Kathleen Harrison, who was, by the way, ex-wife of Terence McKenna. And she's a lovely soul. And we were having a conversation, and I mentioned that I was thinking about addressing this overlooked area of the use of cannabis, but I didn't know that I had a book in me, or a whole book in me for it. And she said, well, if you put that book together, I'll contribute to it. And I've seen her writing. She hasn't written any books, but she's written a number of essays, and she's a beautiful writer, and her sort of soul and wisdom come through her writing, and it just, another light went off. It's like, okay, I'm going to proceed with this project. And that led to now the book has been accepted with Intertraditions, Barron Company, Park Street Press is the particular imprint, to come out in January. And I ended up with 17 contributors for it.
Wow, that's a lot of contributors.
It's impressive.
Very impressive.
Yeah. And actually it was what triggered that, in case you're interested, was I did a book, or wrote a book, which was published in 2010 called Returning to Sacred World. And that put me in touch with a bunch of medicine people that I hadn't been involved with, and that's actually what led me to get involved with the conference, which led me to meet Kat Harrison, which led me eventually to this project. So there's kind of a roundup with it. I will say, in terms of answering your question, that the plant has, we know for sure that its use as a shamanic ally goes back at least to the Neolithic, because they found specific evidence of it, buried with shamans and so on, 7,500 years ago. And we don't have records to say more than that, particularly beyond that. But it's probably safe to say that its use goes back much longer than that as a spiritual ally.
Well, I have a couple of questions. First of all, just out of curiosity, Stephen, are you more left brain logical or more right brain intuitive creative?
There's all these ways of dividing up your style and stuff like that. And I've always felt like I didn't fit into any of them very well. I'm a musician of sorts. Okay. And so I have, some artistic sides to me that way. And I'm also a teacher, so, and kind of at least a quasi or pseudo intellectual. So I'd like to think I've got both going. The left brain issue is a really interesting one because, or left brain, right brain issue, because I think our whole culture is skewed in an unhealthy way toward the left brain dominance.
Right.
And for me, a lot of my life has been a journey toward recognizing the non-rational, direct input of right brain intuition and emotion kind of thing like that, and trusting that, because, I grew up in southern Ontario in Canada in the 1950s and 60s, and it doesn't get much more sort of Protestant, rational, reductionistic than that.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because I'm familiar with the shamans and doing vision quest and different things like that, and rituals around the peyote as well as ayahuasca.
Yes.
Which I haven't done before. And years ago when I was young, I had, what do you call it, shotgun? I can't believe I'm going to say this on global radio, but where someone shotgunned me pot.
Yeah.
And I didn't do well with it because I'm uber intuitive, uber right brained, and super, super sensitive. So then what I ended up doing was picking up other people's stuff, everything from their insecurity to like, dude, this is so great. And then so my mentors and my spiritual teachers were like, if you're that sensitive as an intuitive, you have to be careful with certain hallucinogenics. That's why I was curious with you. You do seem to have this really great balance with your left and right hemispheres, or, obviously what we call in metaphysics, a whole-brained person who has a nice centered heart chakra as well. So I was wondering, in the beginning, when you first started experimenting versus today when you partake in it, what's the biggest difference between then and today, in your opinion?
In my own personal use?
Yeah.
Oh, well, radically different. I didn't know anything about set and setting in those days, really. Although I did have the good fortune, I guess you could say, to come upon a little book which was quite lovely, which was published in 1972 or so, called The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment by Thaddeus Golas. It might still be in print, actually. It's quite a small book. I know it was in print until at least 10 years ago. And his experience was primarily with LSD, but he had some very interesting things to say about what real spirituality is in terms of letting go of the ego and opening up to a vaster, what you might call unconditioned reality. So I did have an experience back then using his ideas as a guideline, basically, where I just sat alone. I took some LSD and I sat alone in a cabin in the woods and meditated, essentially, and had a kind of a complete ego dissolution experience, and basically felt like I saw God in the face of my girlfriend. I wouldn't be the only person who felt that way. But,
for a second, I thought you were alone. Then suddenly your girlfriend is there. So I'm confused. I'm joking.
Well, that's a much longer story.
I thought it was.
She wasn't actually there for most of the experience. To be honest, we'd had a fight, and she was staying. We were sharing. We were living on an 80-acre property with a bunch of hippies,
Yeah.
And she was staying at another cabin while I was staying in this one that particular night. And I guess she got worried about me and came over in the middle of the night. And I stepped out of the cabin. I guess I was still in the full peak of the LSD experience, and I stood in front of her, and I wasn't accustomed to using the word God at that time, but that was the word that came to my lips when I looked at her, and it wasn't like, I was turned on or anything particularly. It was just like, oh my God, it actually wasn't even oh my God, it was just God.
Yeah.
It was actually a frightening experience. It was overwhelming. And I couldn't really stay with it, but it was a reminder of something, much more powerful than my usual way of experiencing the world. No, it wasn't until Terence, my introduction to Terence McKenna, and then I started to reading everything I could get my hands on about the psychedelics, that I started to recognize and realize that. Set and setting are all important, and that there are people that really know how to use these medicines. I also got involved with the Native American Church, and went to quite a few of their ceremonies. They do the peyote prayer ceremonies.
Right.
I went to quite a few of their ceremonies for about 12 years, and was deeply impressed by the care and the knowledge and the depth of understanding that they brought to the use of that medicine. It's just come to me, in the last, say, 15 to 20 years that there's a just wild difference between, a 20-year-old taking psilocybin mushrooms at a party or something like that, and somebody sitting down with these medicines with people guiding you or leading the ceremony that have a deep and long understanding of how to work with them. It's a totally different thing. Did you want to,
Stephen, real quick, can I ask you one question? Because you said this a couple of times, and there may be people out there that may not know what set and setting is.
Yeah, sure.
Could you explain that?
Yeah. I can give a real brief explanation. Set is basically everything you bring to the experience. Your long and short term mental condition. Mm-hmm. Your intention, your preparation. In some cases, some of these medicines, they ask you to do a diet for a period of time leading up to them. It's everything who you are, sort of in the larger and the more specific level that you bring to the encounter. And setting is the actual setting, the physical environment. Is there a ritual setting? Is there some kind of physical container that's safe, protected, and that sort of thing? And who's there, and what is their intention? Your intention is, intention is a big part of all that. It goes with that, but it's more in the set category, I'd say. What the intention you bring to it, like what do you want to do with this medicine, and how reverently are you relating to it, etc. Yeah.
That's thank you.
Yeah,
we appreciate that. There's a lot of people in the chat room asking about that. And before we go to the cannabis and spirituality, delving into your book just a little bit more, I'm curious, what, in your opinion, is the biggest misconception about cannabis?
Well, that depends on who has the misconception or conception, I suppose.
Middle America.
Yeah, Middle America. Yeah, I'd say that they think it's just a drug, and that it makes you stupid or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what were we just talking about? That kind of thing. Like stoners lying around on couches, drinking beer, eating pizza, and watching reruns of MASH or whatever. Mm-hmm. I like to think of, one way of answering that question, I think, is, I'm kind of extrapolating on your question, is that and I'm not alone in thinking of cannabis this way, and other psychedelics are also labeled this way as non-specific amplifiers or unspecific amplifiers. What that means is that cannabis is an amplifier, and it depends on your intention and your skill in using it. So if your intention, conscious or unconscious, is just to escape yourself, escape the rat race, whatever, or just stupefy yourself, cannabis will graciously allow you to do that because it will amplify that intention. In other words, whatever road you're facing down, whatever way you're pointing, it'll take you further or farther. And there's some science to that, but we don't need to get into that particularly.
Right.
It does function as an amplifier. And so most people that have never thought about it or used it as a spiritual ally really don't have a clue, I don't think. And I don't say that disrespectfully. They just don't, know what this plant is capable of. And the whole thing about the sort of forgetfulness or stupidity and all that, partly a function of dosage, but I would say at least as much. It's a function of your intention and these issues of set and setting and your ability to pay attention to the medicine. It's also I also like to think of it as an energy medicine. Mm-hmm. And ideally, I talk a lot about this in the book, and some of the other contributors do as well. Ideally, it's like you're with your lover in some ways, or with your, I guess you could say with your guru or even your doctor. you have to be completely there for the medicine to be able to do its work properly, unobstructed. And so if you're in your head all the time, if you're distracting yourself with entertainment all the time, you're not fully there for this medicine, and you won't know what it's actually capable of doing. As an amplifier, if you can meditate with it, and that could be described or defined in a fairly open-ended way. If you can be present with it and get out of your head at least part of the time, because it is a challenge to do that, of course, regardless of whether there's cannabis involved. If you sit down and meditate, most people are going to have thoughts going through their head. But if you can sit down with that plant and be fully present for it, that amplifying function can take you into a deeper opening of your heart, deeper into the now, as you might say, deeper into a state of peace and even joy.
God, that's such a great answer,
Yes.
because that goes right back to the
great.
title in and of itself, Cannabis
Right.
and Spirituality, because intention, obviously a spiritual practice, set and setting, pay attention, be present, and be now, here and now.
So is there? And I know this because I've never tried any type of cannabis at all. I'm serious. I've never smoked, drank, all that stuff. But my question is: so the difference between somebody who just recreation smoking pot,
Professionals.
yeah, right, and using it more in a spiritual way,
Yeah.
is more about how your mind is already going into that moment. Is that right?
That's one. Yeah, sure. That's acceptable way to put it. Yeah, but like I say, if you sort of sit down with it and just give it your full attention,
Right.
which is, as I say, require you not to be constantly thinking. What you'll see if you pay attention to your breath. I love this phrase, the breath of life. As long as we're alive, we have the breath of life, and if you pay attention to the breath and allow it to. The breath is a healer in a sense. Our breath is a healer. If we can allow our breath to just be free and do its job without restriction as much as possible, the breath brings freshly oxygenated blood into our whole organism. And because of cannabis's pharmacokinetic effects that I alluded to previously, it increases when you first smoke or vaporize. It doesn't happen quite the same way if you take it orally, like eating it or whatever. But if you smoke or vaporize it, within, I don't know, seconds or a minute or two, your heart rate will speed up somewhat. And what that's doing is it's increasing the flow. It's pumping an extra level or degree of freshly oxygenated blood into all the extremities, throughout your organism. And if you can pay attention to that and be with it and stay out of your head mostly, it can open you up. It can relax you, and it can open your heart at the same time as well. Lots of people have had those experiences with cannabis.
So it sounds
And
like,
I'd like to say, just to finish up on that, if I may,
Sure.
that it's not about, I'm sure a lot of people, particularly people that are not cannabis friendly, will think, oh, well, maybe it does that, but then, you're depending on a substance, right? So I want to speak to that as well, because it's not about staying in that state all the time. Buddhists would say that's a kind of a sidetrack, an obstacle. They call it the arhat mentality, that it's all about me and my enlightenment or my pleasure or whatever. I prefer to think of cannabis as a kind of a retraining of the mind-body system. That when you have those experiences and you have those glimpses of that deeper peace and that deeper sense of connection to the present, then that you never really forget that, right? It becomes a marker point, and it can become in more of a habit over a long period of time.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. Thank you for telling us that. I have a weird question. How in your opinion, knowing what you know and knowing what we don't know, because we don't know a lot, as you can tell, Stephen. Thank you for being so gracious and kind to us. I'm curious. Monsanto and certain other corporations are poisoning the hell out of every bit of our food resources. How is Monsanto or other pesticides, if at all, connected to the crop?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm not really an expert on it, but I do know enough to speak about it a little bit. It's a definite concern.
Yeah.
Here in Canada, I don't know if you're aware, our current government, recently elected last October, has promised a full legalization in this country by next spring. And so there's a lot of discussion going on about that right now. And there's a lot of problems already existing in in states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, about how the plant is produced or grown. I mean, and also not just grown, because a lot of the product is in the form of oils and tinctures.
Yeah.
And processes involved in that can be quite polluting or dangerous even. Toxic substances. Butane is one of the ones that's used for I think they call it decarboxylating the plant and turning it into something like an oil that can be used as a tincture or whatever, or a spray even. You're going to see a lot more of those products, by the way, oils and sprays. They're going to be a very convenient method of intake for a lot of people. But yes, monitoring the use of pesticides.
Yep.
And it's actually even beyond that. It's not just deliberately introduced pesticides, but there's a lot of things that can happen to the plant in the growing stage. Molds and other bacteria can get into it. We just had a 3-page feature in the national newspaper up here, the Toronto Globe and Mail, on the Globe and Mail sent a team and bought samples of cannabis from, I don't know, a dozen or more dispensaries in Toronto, and had them tested. And something like, I don't know, a third of them or something would have failed Health Canada's standards. And a lot of it was stuff like I was just talking about, bacteria and molds and other things that get into the plant if you're not watching it carefully. So it's a huge issue. What really should happen, I think, in the simplest terms, and lots of people could refine this or even disagree with this, I think, is that it should be delivered. Particularly now we're talking about it as a medicine more than as a spiritual ally, I would say. But that's going to be its primary use, medicine and maybe quote unquote recreation. For medicine in particular, and we're finding out that this plant has just unbelievably great potential for a variety of medical uses. But for medicine, you need to have it dispensed by people who know what they're talking about. There's a lot to it. It's not a simple thing. It's not like selling alcohol or even, a pharmaceutical from the pharmacy where the pharmacist has, read a little bit about it and, can say, here, take 3 of these and, blah, blah. There's so many different options. There's so many different strains and varieties and different combinations. There's something like 1,200 chemicals in this plant. Wow. 144, I think it is, cannabinoids. And they can all be in different combination. And there's a whole bunch of other chemicals called terpenes that all have an influence on the plant. It needs to be delivered by people who know what they're talking about, for one thing. And there need to be tight controls or, good inspection on methods of growing so that it's produced in a healthy way.
I thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break, but before we do, we just want to remind all of Truth Be Told listeners with Tony and Eddie that we're talking with Stephen Gray. He's the author of Cannabis and Spirituality, which is an explorer's guide to an ancient plant spirit ally. We're going to be back in just a few seconds and continue our interview. Thank you, Stephen.
Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. You suffer from anxiety, from depression, maybe even chronic pain? Well, listen up. Truth Be Told is going to tell you about a breakthrough program built on over 100 years of therapies used in America's returning veterans to help you successfully overcome PTSD, anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. The secret proven in study after study. Music therapy. The effects of music are nothing short of amazing. From strokes to PTSD, music has been shown to improve the quality of life. Now, one of the latest music therapy programs being used in America's veteran hospitals can be yours to experience for free at home and to help your own anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. Or just relax after a hard day. It's called Whole Tones. It takes music therapy to a new level. This revolutionary program makes use of specifically designed frequencies that have been shown to stimulate your body's natural healing power down to a cellular level. If it works for battle-scarred vets, can it work for you? Well, experience it for yourself for free at sweetwholetones.com. Like Tony Sweet, that's SWEET. Go to sweetwholetones.com.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Eddie Connor.
And I'm Tony Sweet.
And we have with us the extraordinary author of Cannabis and Spirituality. It's an explorer's guide to an ancient plant spirit ally. This is Stephen Gray. And Tony, why don't you lead right back in? You had a great question during the break.
Well, my question is because I'm very ADD. I'm an ADPD person when Eddie
He's an
was
ADP person.
Yeah, ADPPPPDP person. But my question is this is something that when you say that, meditation and using cannabis, I know that I think I would want somebody to mentor me on this. Is that something your book talks about? Because like Eddie says, when you want to do meditation, you go to
a meditation teacher. And when you want to learn the law of attraction, you go to a law of attraction teacher until you can do it on your own.
Because normally, people are like, hey, I'm just going to meditate. I'm going to smoke pot. And they're not going to know exactly how to use the cannabis in the spiritual world.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. Sure, it is a good question. I think it would be great if people would do that. There are churches springing up all over the states. First Cannabis Church of Oregon, First Cannabis Church of Alabama, different things like this. I think doing it in a ritual context is a great way to learn how to really use this plant wisely. On the other hand, or maybe along with that notion. It's a very gracious and forgiving plant, and you can experiment on your own with this plant. I actually would not say that about any of the other major entheogens. I wouldn't say do ayahuasca on your own, or peyote or LSD particularly. I don't encourage that at all because they're very, very powerful amplifiers. Cannabis can be really powerful, and dosage is really important that way. And if you take too much orally, it can be about as strong as any of the so-called psychedelics. It can be very bizarre and distressing. My doctor, for example, my family doctor, doesn't like cannabis at all. He doesn't know anything much about it except for the fact that his only contact with it is people come into his office having a kind of a freak out. And I would say that is what I would call an overdose, and not knowing how to handle the plant. So, for someone who's not particularly familiar with cannabis and wants to use it in conjunction with meditation, for example, I would say start with very small doses. But as I implied earlier too, it's really important to learn about this plant.
Right.
That's another, I would say, misconception, is that that's just, it's a consumer item or something. I think of it as actually like you could almost take courses on it, that you could learn how to use it wisely, how much, how often, what strains. This whole continuum. There's two actual different species. There's Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. They're actually different plants. They look different. Cannabis indica is sort of shorter, bushier, somewhat different color of green than sativa. And the sativas are, just to put it really briefly, commonly thought of as more more stimulating in certain ways. The indicas are more potentially more relaxing. They're sometimes soporific, if you know that word, more drowsy-inducing potentially. People that are using it medicinally to help with sleep are going to be prescribed an indica strain. So depending on each individual mind, some hybrid. There's lots of hybrids that combine indica and sativa together now. In fact, most plants that you're going to get commercially are a hybrid. But all of that, and as I say, dosage is really important. as well. So people can experiment with this plant on their own. I would say if they're sensitive and inexperienced, start with really small amounts. Especially a lot of the cannabis these days is super strong. But that's one of the great things about legalization, and why I said earlier that even if you want, even not medicinally, but if you want to use it as a spiritual ally, having people who know what they're talking about and can guide you at a dispensary. I don't mean in a ceremony particularly necessarily, but people that you walk into your dispensary or store and they know the potency, they know the strains, you can talk to them. You should be able to sit down with people and have a conversation. Yes, I want to use cannabis this way, and what would you recommend, There's a lot of strains and combinations now that are very, very gentle and actually don't even feel like a high necessarily, but actually can just help people relax a little and be a little more present. And, you mentioned the ADHD thing. Some of those kinds of strains, I could go on about this for a while, and I'm not an expert. There are people that know way more about that aspect of this stuff than I do. But, for example, this THC is the most prevalent cannabinoid in the plant by volume, and that's the one that is really the intensely psychoactive one, the mind-altering cannabinoid. The second most prevalent cannabinoid in the plant is cannabidiol, commonly just referred to as CBD, and CBD is not, technically speaking, as for a medical person, they'd say it's psychoactive, but so is aspirin. It's not mind-altering in the way that THC does. So there's a lot of research now going on with what they call CBD-rich strains that can calm people, but don't particularly have a lot of high in them. And those are being developed for medical purposes. But there's so much that you can learn about how to combine CBD with THC, because they actually trade off. There's only a room for like X amount of the two of them together. So the more THC, the less CBD, and vice versa. Right. So there's all kinds of different combinations of those, and then working with the sativa indica issue, it's quite complex actually. Yeah, so I kind of got rambly there.
That's okay. That was it. It explains a lot.
Yeah,
more than like I'm learning and Eddie's learning.
And I know nothing. I know this though. Back in the late '80s and '90s, when all of my friends really enjoyed pot and all kinds of other recreational drugs, and I was kind of just like, I'll just have a natural light, thank you. Back then, there was this thing going around in the community for almost 10 years. It was marijuana, but they were calling it Hawaiian pot. And they were like, Hawaiian pot is the strongest. And then I watched some of my friends smoke it, and I was scared for them for a minute. Because their level was here, but what they took was there. And so that turned me off to it. So here's my question. How is one strand of marijuana or cannabis super, super strong, let's say back in the 80s and 90s, versus I'm getting an idea of how you can really make it strong and extra potent today. It's kind of like a Frankenstein cannabis or a Jurassic cannabis. So then I would assume it's more pure. And how did they strengthen it then versus how are they strengthening it and making it really more powerful today, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not an expert on how they do that, actually, but I mean, back in the 80s, I don't know what that would be, that particular strain. Currently, there's just a lot of genetic breeding going on, and people breed for high THC content. So in the bud, which is what you generally smoke or vaporize, the THC content converts of 20 to 30%, and perhaps even more. And again, the more THC, the less CBD, and CBD potentially antidepressants as well as calming effects. So that's one of the reasons there's a lot more research into CBD now. And by the way, these other things, these tinctures, and there's concentrated things that people are putting out now that can be, if I'm not mistaken, don't anyone quote me exactly on the number here, but I've heard, I think, upwards of like 75% THC.
Oh my God.
So the stuff your granddaddy was smoking was perhaps in the 3 to 10% range. I mean,
Super virgin.
We used to get some pretty good stuff, and occasionally, like we'd get Colombian weed. And I grew up in Ontario, in Canada, and actually we were getting a lot of hashish back then from places like Afghanistan and on and so on. Some of that could be pretty strong. But now there's the potential to get this immensely strong stuff. And that can actually be, scary, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
It can be disorienting, it can be dangerous for certain people. And, we could talk about that if you had enough time. But there are certain people that probably shouldn't be taking cannabis at all.
Yeah,
They're just not mentally stable enough. And because, as I say, it is an amplifier.
Right.
And if you're having negative, distressed ideation, it can amplify that. That's why this set and setting issue is so important, especially for people that are sensitive. And I also want to say about that, that I think, there's a misconception, I guess you could say, within the group of people that do use cannabis, oftentimes, that they have the wrong, I would say, the wrong approach to it. They're treating it as an external drug, in a sense, and a consumerist sort of item. So if you take this, you're going to be able. It's like they're treating it like beer, to escape, But from the spiritual point of view, in a sense, there's no there. It's a relationship. It's a dance.
Right.
And that's where this whole, set and setting, intention, and all that come into it. You need to learn most people need to learn how to use this plant wisely. And frequency is also very important. And again, all these topics could take a long time to talk about, but I'll just put it really briefly. Some people that I know, mature, intelligent, active, engaged people, use cannabis daily in light doses, and it just puts them into a zone. So they're not, I wouldn't really say that's spiritual use, but some people are able to do that. It just takes a little bit of an edge off. It calms them down a little and allows them to focus even better. So in that sense, it can actually, some of the right kinds of combinations that I was talking about can actually benefit people with ADHD and situations like that, because it can calm down that committee of voices. However, for deeper spiritual work, that's more like the tradition, of people that have been using this plant that way for thousands of years. It's probably, in general, I know I'd get some argument on this, but it's probably better to use it less frequently. There is a tolerance effect that kicks in if you're using it all the time. So if you really want to go deep with it and you think you can handle that, actually, I'll just interrupt myself and say that one way I've talked about the best dosage for it, the optimal dosage is how much you can handle and stay present and calm and mostly out of your head with. If you can't do that, if it just makes your head spin, gets you tight or scared or whatever, either in that moment you've done too much or you're not handling the amount that you've done. So you're in that sense you've done too much. So that's why I also said start small, start light for people.
Now, do you
it's not about getting high, really. That's temporary. It's going to be gone in 2 hours. It's about recalibrating your whole way of being in the world, that you can calm down, that you can open your heart, you can be at peace, you can be tender, you can be sensitive, you can appreciate the moment.
Well, and this is great. This is great information, and I'm going to walk away from this interview learning a lot. And this is another thing that popped into my head.
You can learn more if you let Stephen send you just a little thing to balance out your ADD.
Yeah, you'd have to be there and hold my hand.
That ain't gonna happen.
But
that's not my role.
Yeah, but my question is though. Let's say forget the recreational use. I want to really focus on the spiritual side and go deeper in my meditation.
Yes.
Is it best to smoke, or is it best for edible, or both, or is there one or the other?
No, I wouldn't say there's one or the other. A lot of people prefer vaporizing because smoking, you're burning the material, and it has a lot of the same irritants and particulates and so on that cigarette tobacco has.
Right.
So it's commonly believed that vaporizing is a lot better for your health that way. because it's only heating it up to somewhere around the boiling point, I believe. So it's not actually burning the material and releasing all those kind of chemicals. The THC and the primary cannabinoids, most people believe this is not solid science. This is just kind of loosey-goosey science that I'm talking here. But the primary chemical constituents that you need to experience the plant are generally considered to be released through vaporizing. Now, taking it orally is another thing altogether. The vaporizing and smoking have a basically immediate effect, like within seconds or a minute or two. And within a minute or two or three, you're at peak with it. Whereas if you take it orally, it can take upwards of 2 hours to reach its full effect, and it'll last much longer. So it's very different that way. It's going to come on gradually, very slowly. People run into problems sometimes because if they're not experienced doing that, as I say, you can have, I could go on and tell you some, in the literature, the bizarre distortions that people have, where your whole visual field is completely transformed. It's a very, very powerful plant in high doses. It's not dangerous, by the way. There is no LD50. It won't kill you, but it can definitely cause bizarre distortions, and they can last a long time, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. But it also tends to be more of a bottle experience, somewhat more bodily and perhaps a little less mentally if you take it orally. And again, dosage is so important, doing it gently, especially if you're not used to it, and knowing your material. Kids, young people are so casual about stuff like that. I was when I was that age. Oh, you got a drug? Sure, I'll try it. Oh, it's a psychedelic? Sure, I'll take some. I didn't get into heroin or cocaine or any of those things, but if it had promise of of something kind of mind expanding, which is what the word psychedelic means, people are a lot of young people are just like, sure, not paying any attention to setting or the source of the material they're taking or the dosage or anything.
Wow. And we have about 3 minutes left. What do you think about the Prime Minister in Canada setting it up so that he's releasing and clearing the records of everyone who's been in prison for cannabis, marijuana, that sort of thing? Have you heard about this yet?
I've heard that they've made some inroads into that. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's sometimes I make an analogy to the Berlin Wall. Imagine if you were a guard on the Berlin Wall with a machine gun for 20 years and killed people, and then they tear the wall down. And you go, like, if you're enough of a sensitive person, you might be thinking, my God, I killed people for this, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, cannabis is the people's plant. It belongs to the people. It always has, and it always should be. And it's really, again, this is a long topic to go into any meaningful detail, but up until the 1930s, when they made it illegal in the United States, you could get any type of cannabis in an apothecary, in a pharmacy. It was a medicine. There was no stigma attached to it at all back in the late 19th century.
Right.
It's just, the sort of the chunk of the 20th century where it developed this stigma.
Yep. Well, and I know just a tiny bit about this. Part of what they were doing, it's like the Asian community, one of the ways the corporations and the big money people started prejudicing against them or trying to control them was they enjoyed opium, and opium was legal. And then they made opium illegal. Then they started locking up a lot of the very, very powerful Asians. Members in the Asian community. I think the marijuana was associated with the Latino community here. And then there was something connected to the African American community. So you couldn't lock people up for prejudice, but you could lock them up for the things their community enjoyed. And that's part of how it got the stigma that it did in the United States, which is really, really sad. So let me ask you this. We have literally 1 minute left here, but Stephen, we want to ask you, where do you see cannabis in the next 5 years?
Well, I'd be more like a wish-fulfilling fantasy, I suppose. It's going to. I don't think there's any question. It's going to be legal in far more jurisdictions. The belly of this beast is being broken, so to speak, or the back, and so the stigma is disappearing rapidly. Grandmothers are taking it for medicine and not thinking of it as this drug anymore. So it's really changing that way. You're also going to see way more people talking about it for spiritual use. As I mentioned, these churches are starting up and so on, and I hope that happens a lot. I think it will. I think there's going to be a great increase in knowledge and wise use of this plant. Of course, stupid recreational use. Not that all recreational use is stupid by any means, but stoner, sort of stuff will continue. By the way, on that note, in my remaining 13 seconds here or whatever, I don't see alcohol as a good companion to cannabis. Alcohol is almost the opposite. It's a tranquilizer. It interferes with functioning in a whole different way than cannabis. Cannabis, if you really pay attention to it in the ways that I've been talking about, can be very refined energies, and alcohol just mitigates that.
It's like, let me relax. Here's some speed, and I'll take Quaalude with it.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, it'd be a big contradiction in your system.
Well, I know you have a Facebook page that you'd like people to go to. Could you tell us where to go to on that?
Yeah, it's called Cannabis and Spirituality, and encourage people to join it. And if they have something intelligent to say that, on this general open-ended topic of spirituality with cannabis, I also encourage and invite them to posts that I will really approve, unless they're saying I'm voting for Trump.
Right?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And then there's the website, cannabisspirituality.com.
Perfect. Well,
Fantastic.
we so enjoyed you, and hope you come back. Now, this book is not even being released until December 24th of this year.
Oh, really? I don't know where you got that.
Oh, that's on it's on Amazon. It says paperback. It says December 24th, 2016. Can people get the book now?
No, you can pre-order it now from Inner Traditions and maybe from Amazon. I don't know. I haven't looked at that. Inner Traditions told me the publication is January 2017, but maybe it's getting to Amazon earlier than that. And are you sure they weren't talking about the ebook version? I haven't looked, actually.
You're going to have to look, because it doesn't say ebook. It says paperback.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Fantastic.
but either way,
cool.
either way, we hope it's a bestseller, and we definitely want to have you back again. We enjoy your conversation, and such an intelligent man, so we appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen.
Well, thanks for your good questions and your respect about this as well.
Oh, of course.
We respect you.
All right, everybody. Stephen Gray. All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have a great show for you guys. We're going to be doing a call-in show. Eddie and his crew. Was the Guy Squad? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the Psychic Guy Squad is with Psychic Dave and Brett San Antonio.
So get your questions ready. Now, if you guys tuned in halfway through, if you want to listen to it again, maybe there's something in there that you really want to listen to, go to our YouTube channel, Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. Please subscribe. And we're almost at 300,000 views. We're here in just probably another week or so. I'm so excited that you guys are listening to our stuff. If you want to listen to our podcast, though, go to iHeartRadio, listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, all the places. And then please go to truthbetoldwebtv.com. Check out our upcoming guests. We have some great guests coming up in August. All right. We're out of here. This is Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
And we'll be right back.
Bye, y'all.